Talking of Andy being a good speaker, let me do her introduction. As Dale mentioned, she is not able to join today live, but she has already sent her presentation. So Dale will play her presentation. So good morning, everyone. And I'll just do the introduction of Andy. And it is my pleasure to introduce her. She is becoming a familiar face to NCRO. She had already made one presentation last year. Some of you may remember in last March on the problem of pain. And she's an excellent speaker. And we felt inviting her again for today's topic, which is a very timely topic. Andy is a registered nurse and she's a certified dementia practitioner. And she has many credentials in the field of dementia. She's a member of Dementia Friendly Community Task Force of Michigan. She works with Wayne State University as a writer, presenter, and consultant. And she has extensive background in the hospice care, and she serves on the Education Board of Michigan Home Health and Hospice Association. She's a volunteer Elder Abuse Alliance in Genesee County, Michigan, and she's a person what she her walk and talk is very much matching in the life. Her philosophy is very simple. Life lends us many experiences, and that adversity is a great teacher. Knowledge is indeed in our lives, and it is a power, but it empowers us. It also requires that we do what is right and good for others, and that's what her mission in the life is. And that's what she's doing right now in Ohio with the children who have anxiety and depression issues. She has learned much through personal trials and experiences. She finds joy and honor in sharing her knowledge that she has gained over the years. Please welcome Andy. And Dale, now you can please play her presentation.
Hello, and welcome to our topic today. Depression can be a funny thing. Kind of a weird title, but I'll explain going on. We have to talk about some very dark things before we can step into the light. And so I want to start out by saying, number one, we are not a happy nation. We have so many things that are causing angst for us, for the elder population, for the middle-aged population, and for the children. Everybody is having some anxiety, some angst in their lives. We have wars, we have fires. Right now in Michigan, we're having fire, the smoke from the Canadian fire that is coming down, and the air quality isn't real good today. But we know that that's going to change. Clearer days are coming. However, we also have other things that are causing us angst. We have a lot of division in our society today. We have a lot of political division. We have a lot of personal issues that we are dealing with. And all of this leads. This is a slide I love to show to people. And I ask people, what's the first thing you see when you look at this? Now, many people will say, oh, I see the waves and the crashing and all of this, and it's just terrible. Well, did you see the little tiny itty bitty lighthouse up there? That lighthouse is on Hook Island in County Wexford, Ireland. It was built between 1210 and 1230, and it's the oldest working lighthouse in the world. And that lighthouse is there for a purpose. It helps the sailors to navigate to a safe harbor, that place where they're going to be free from the storm and safe from all of the boulders. Or it's there to warn them that there are boulders in this area and you need to make a wide berth around it. The lighthouse had a job. And the thing is that we have jobs too. You see, we can go ahead and we can see that lighthouse and we can see that it is there to help guide us into safe harbor. However, it's not like a tractor beam from Star Trek. It's not going to pull you in. We have the work to do. We have to navigate that. And so really, when it gets right down to anxiety and depression, etc., we have to want peace in our lives more than allowing that chaos to have free reign. It really is all about choice. That's truly what it's about. Now, when I show this, I want you to see or to know that, number one, I am not a therapist, but I do have a lot of experience dealing with the topic of conversation today. I have a 20-year background in hospice where I have had families deal with their grief and anger and guilt. A lot of that happens at end of life and through the disease and dying process. But I also had the privilege, and you're going to think that this is weird, but I did have the privilege, the blessing of being raised in a physically and emotionally abusive household. Why do I say that that's a blessing and a privilege? Well, because it helped me learn how to take that responsibility for my own life. And I often like to say that, shame on them for what they did, but shame on me if I see that there's a different road and I don't take it. Then it becomes my responsibility. And remember, it is something that we all have. We have that responsibility. I do also have to say that one of the things that has helped me through it is that I am a woman of faith. And faith is different than being religious. It is, or spiritual is, I should say, is different than being religious, where you have this place of calm that helps to calm you down and to make you feel better. And that can be a place that you go to. It can be a number of things. It's a spiritual thing that brings you that peace. And so I am a spiritual, very woman of faith, like I said. And I make no apologies for that. I think we all have a spiritual side to us, and sometimes we tend to ignore that a little bit. The objectives are pretty clear today. What we're going to talk about is anxiety and how it contributes to depression, despair, and like I said, all of those negative things that are unfortunately happening in our lives. But we're also going to talk about isolation and loneliness and how that impacts all of us, particularly the older generation and the younger people as well. There is an importance in connection. We need that. We feed on that all the time. I mean, you guys get together and visit with your friends or your family. This is something that's very important to all of us in order to hang on to that hope. And we're also going to discuss how you can eat to win. Believe it or not, some of the foods that we put in our body are not the best things in the world for us. And so we want to make sure that we are eating the proper foods. That's going to be critical as well. We are like books, and just like a book, a lot of people will look at the outside of that book and determine whether or not they want to read it just based on what they see. But when people look at other people, we often just see what they want us to see, and we can actually look into a mirror and we can see what we want to see. But if we don't deal with our feelings, those things that are on the inside, we're going to have greater issues. And it doesn't matter what we think we see. It's what other people are going to see in us. So we're going to have greater issues later. What we experience internally will eventually impact our physical and our emotional well-being. It's not only going to be internally, but it's going to be on the outside as well. And it's going to be quite evident because our relationships, our jobs, everything is going to be impacted. So let's examine and define and see how our anxiety works with us and does change our lives for the worse, but also how it can change our lives for the better. People don't realize that, but it's true. It works for the better. So do you wear glasses? Do you have or do you need emotional glasses? You see, when we look at other people and see what's going on, it is the perception of what's happening on the outside of them that we see, but we also have our perception that leads to anxieties within ourselves. And I call that power of stinking thinking. When we tell ourselves, oh, well, they're not going to like what I have to say. And so maybe you get a little bit nervous about going out and doing a public speaking engagement, or perhaps you hear your name mentioned by people in a conversation that you're not really privy to, but you overhear it and you tend to believe what? That they're talking about you, or are they being positive or negative? But it's decided by you and what spin you decide to put on it. Oftentimes we put on the negative. That's the first thing that we do. It is sad. Is this a picture of water or sky? You see, it really depends on what you're experiencing at the moment, doesn't it? But one thing's for sure, it does look like a storm. And let me be clear, we are all in the same storm. We are not in the same boat. Some of us have yachts, some have canoes, some have dinghies, and some people are drowning. But we need to be kind and just and help whoever we can when we're going through difficult times. And when we have to consider also that anxiety and grief and what it is, we have to consider who's experiencing it. And, if we're going to look at that, we have to remember that we're all different people. And so don't judge, because this is going to take away from them and take away from you that opportunity to be a support in their life. Anxiety disorders are actually the most common mental illness in the United States today. It affects 40 million adults over the age of 18. That's 18% of the population. And this is what happens every single year. Every single year. And why is it a problem? Why do I say that it's the most common mental illness? Because that's what it's classified as. And a lot of people don't want to be classified as to having a mental illness. And so many people will not go to the doctor and have treatment for their anxiety. Only 36% of those suffering from anxiety and disappointment actually go in and receive treatment. And so the people that do go in for treatment are 3 to 5 times more likely to go to the doctor, and they're 6 times more likely to be hospitalized for psychiatric disorders than those who don't suffer from anxiety. So it's kind of a shocking number, but it does lead to a lot of things. And first of all, I do have to tell you that there's some weird risks that are associated with this. The risk factors can include genetics, brain chemistry, personality, and life events. Certainly somebody who grew up in a bad childhood or living in a bad marriage or something, a bad relationship, can experience those life events that are going to cause that anxiety as well. But there are D's that defeat: disappointment, depression, despondency, and despair. And a lot of these are, they kind of hinge on one another. But what do each of these have in common? Well, the difference between anxiety and depression can actually be best explained by laying out what each condition looks like. So depression is a mood disorder, while anxiety is classified differently. It's in its own separate category, and yet they're both considered mental illnesses. Depression will revolve less around fear or worry, and it's going to be more on excessive and persistent sadness or numbness. They might lose interest in things that once brought them a lot of joy and reward. They're going to have less energy, less motivation, and it's something that, if it's usually affecting a person like that, they feel as though that they're dragging around a weight. And simple tasks can be a whole lot more difficult for this individual. And as the anxiety grows within, it usually takes up residence in the heart and mind, ultimately leading down that dark path that I spoke about. And it promises to lead us to utter defeat unless we decide to do something about it. And even before the pandemic, we weren't making decisions all the time. Do I do this? Do I do that? Do I buy this car? Do I marry this person? Do I call it quits? Lots of different things. And when we have all of these decisions that are on us all the time, sometimes we're deciding between two very unpleasant alternatives. It's not always good versus bad, and not always pro versus con. But sometimes neither of those decisions have a very happy choice in the end. And that can be what is called decision fatigue. This is what we're struggling from. So this, when we think about that, again, it's our choice. But 1/3 of Americans experience high levels of psychological stress during the COVID outbreak, according to the Pew Research. and it hasn't abated for some people. And now we have to balance emotional, economic, physical factors with our school children. So really, decision-making process becomes so stressful that the CDC, or Center for Disease Control and Prevention, have offered a decision-making tool, believe it or not, for parents and guardians, suggesting how they can help the young children now. And it really is important that we work with these young children, because this is the group that's coming up, and they're looking at us for help. They're looking at us to mentor them. And we can't mentor them if we're not whole ourselves. I mentioned that there's a connection between food and water and the different things that we eat. Some foods actually do make us feel better than others. But what foods do you turn to when you're seeking comfort? It might help to understand that the relationship between what we eat and how we feel can be very complex. And there are a lot of explanations for this cause and effect relationship. And one of those is blood sugar levels. Low blood sugar, our brains slow down. There's a subtle shift in our ability to concentrate. Or in some people, it can actually cause them to have a short temper, irrational thinking, or those full-blown meltdowns that we hear about. And yet, glucose is essential to your brain. In order to have it work properly, and regular supply of carb-rich foods are sometimes very helpful for us. But if we can get those things from natural things rather than processed things, you're doing much better, much better. If somebody else had to make it for you, it's probably a good thing to stay away from. But neurotransmitters that we have in our heads are really important. We have neurotransmitters in caffeine, and it's going to stimulate that nervous system. And it's an important part to the brain as well, because coffee or any other caffeinated drink, there we go, works by tricking the brain into releasing naturally occurring chemicals called dopamine and serotonin. And in addition to that, caffeine always encourages your body to release hormones like adrenaline. And so it's these hormones that are involved in that fight or flight response. And if you're in an emergency situation, it's helpful to have. Not so much if you're sitting at home or in your office, but oftentimes we see people that are heavy coffee drinkers, that they experience irritability, agitation, and anxiety. But we do know this, that water is vital for life, because our bodies are about 60% water, or almost 3/4 of our brain are impacted by water. And when I say it's water, it's not, it's electrolytes. We always call it water because if you don't have enough water, you aren't going to have that hydration of your system, and that will definitely impact how you feel. So make sure that you're eating foods that are going to be natural, unprocessed as much as possible, balanced, so you have protein and you have all of the other things that have the macronutrients as well as micronutrients. And then you want to make sure that you're having about 64 ounces of water every day. And that water really should be filtered water. It shouldn't be water that's coming from the municipal tap where it has all kinds of various things in there to keep it clean. But that actually will help to give your body what it needs so that it can fight with some of these things and not give abnormal reactions. Equally important to what we put in our body, though, is what we put into our mind. So when you see this, what do you look at it? You're looking at that little dot. Well, consider this. Maybe that dot is our cares and our troubles. Are we missing a clean background that has no mistakes and no worry in it? Because what we focus on, we will get in the end. And we want to make sure we're focusing on that pure, that good, everything that we can have. Now, anxiety is definitely our response to worry and fear. And so our body is going to tell you what's going on. It's going to give you that alert system, if you will. And children are definitely impacted, but you know what? They're impacted by what is impacting us. They can read us. If they can read faces, they can read you, and they can read your emotions. So if you're like this man on the slide and he's, oh, he's just overwhelmed, he's done. How are your kids perceiving that? Are they looking at you going, how are you going to help me when you're having these problems on your own? I don't know what to do. Anxiety isn't really very attractive when it's seen, but often it's very well hidden. So when we recognize the anxiety symptoms, this is what we have to look forward to. If we have just regular everyday anxiety, it's not a real big deal. Most everybody is going to have that every single day, and it's okay. And then we have this general anxiety disorder, which means that they're having a little bit more problem dealing with the anxiety. Hasn't turned to depression yet, but it is anxiousness. And, I said earlier that we have a very small number of people that are gathering any help at all from healthcare professionals to help them deal with all of this. But if all anxiety disorders are related to difficulty tolerating uncertainty, and therefore people with general anxiety disorder try to plan or control situations. And many people believe that worry prevents bad things from happening, so they view it as risky to even give up worry. But what happens? Look at their body is going to tell them. We get tense, and so we wind up with shoulder tension, neck muscle tension, and gives us headaches. We have the insomnia. We can't sleep. And it is so important for us to get the rest that we have to have. But those are things that you're going to see when you have anxiety, and those symptoms that are going to be there. And not only do you have all of those symptoms, but believe it or not, you have a higher mortality rate, as anxiety is related to irritable bowel syndrome, asthma, ulcers, heart disease. Why heart disease? Because it has cortisol. And when we secrete that cortisol, that is that hormone that is going to trigger responses in our body, sets our minds on a different course, and those stressors that we have are going to be that much bigger. And that cortisol then becomes a lot greater in our system, and it's going to help us cling on to some of the bad chemicals, and those are stored in our fat. And that fat that we see around our midsection, where we have that belly fat, that spare tire, whatever you want to call it, it's where the cortisol has helped our bodies hang on to this, because it has to make sure that we have what we need to fight in the future. But here's the problem with that. It doesn't just stay on the outside. That's not just that fat you can grab with your hand. That fat actually goes around all the internal organs, and it smooshes them. It gets in around the heart and around the lungs and around the liver. This is not a healthy thing. And so you see what we have to do. We have to face our stressors. We have to reduce the triggers, and we have to set our mind in a different direction, because otherwise we will go into depression. So here's one of the things that we do have to think about as well. There's a fact, and that is that when we put our expectations into someone else's hands, they receive that power to do whatever they desire, and you get exactly what they want for you. Well, that's not really very cool. So here's the deal. You're trying to live up to their expectations for you to be happy, and it's not realistic at all. Disappointment means that you have an unmet expectation. Maybe you don't have the love of your life or that dream job. What if your dream job was being a gymnast? What if that was mine? I can't even walk across the room without walking into a wall sometimes. Gymnast is probably not my thing. So yeah, disappoints me, but it's not the end of the world. But what could be the end of the world is if I let that continued disappointment lead me into a depression. And depressive disorders are very common. They're associated with increased health hazards, mortality, and impact on other disorders. And they're predicted to be the leading cause of disease by 2030. You see, those hormones that we secrete when we're stressed or anxious are going to land somewhere in our body, and it's going to impact us whether we think we are going to be impacted or not. It is a very important thing. I like this quote on here. It says, "Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been." We had a file that we kept for many, many years, and it was in our file cabinet, and it was labeled, "Someday I'll build a deck. Someday I'll go here or there, or I'll do something," right? Well, I got so frustrated because we didn't do anything, and I threw the file away. Because if you have a "Someday I'll" file and you don't do anything with it, it is a source of anxiety. So now when we see that there's something that we want to do, we put that note on the refrigerator, and then we look at the calendar. When is it going to happen? Are we always going to be able to live up to that? No, but it's that constant thing that, like my gymnast thing. I'm disappointed I can't be a gymnast. But if I hung on to that reality, or if I said, that person is supposed to love me and they don't love me, how could they not love me? Or I don't have that home, how could I not have that home? You're hanging on to something that is going to happen. That is when you're going to release more of those chemicals in your body that are going to help create more disease burden in your body. You don't want that. But disappointment is very, very awful, and it's especially bad when we lose hope along with it, and that often happens when we go into a depression. We don't want to go into that depression. There was a doctor, her name Dr. Shane Lopez, and she was Gallup Senior Scientist in Residence and was one of the world's leading researchers on hope. And she once said, "The tiny ripple of hope you set in motion can change the path of someone's life." And it does. It changes your path, but it also changes those around you. Remember, we are like electrical energy, and we are going to impact those that are around us. Don't believe me? Go into a room and act like you're very sad. And if it's a very happy place, pretty soon you're going to be Debbie Downer, and they're not going to want you to be there. Now, depression, as I said earlier, with the anxiety disorders, is considered a mental health disorder, and it's characterized by persistently depressed mood, loss of interest in activities, lots of things that impair daily life. And it, as I said earlier, also it can be biological, physiological, it can be social things of distress, but really what the researchers are finding is that it actually can change the brain function, including altering certain neural circuits in the brain. And that persistent feeling of sadness or loss of interest is what's going to be characterized by that. And there can be changes in sleep, appetite, concentration, daily behavior, self-esteem. All of these things are going to be impacted by that. But note, I said it is persistent. And so this person, no matter what you try to do for them, they're like Eeyore. It's just not ever going to be good. They're hanging on to that. And this is where we have to be careful, be mindful, be loving, but sometimes we can't take that burden from them. And we need to step away and love them from a distance because it can impact our lives as well. Depression is more often seen in women than in men. Some differences in the manner that it's going to impact people is also found not only in sex, but in age. In men, it manifests as tiredness, irritability, anger. They might be more prone to reckless behavior, drug abuse, or even alcohol abuse. And they often tend to not recognize that they are depressed, and so they fail to seek help. When women are depressed, they tend to be very inwardly focused. They're very sad. They feel worthless and guilty. And in children, you're going to see different things yet in teenagers as well. And oftentimes, what you'll often see with an individual is that they will frequently have comorbid anxiety that goes with that, maybe eating disorders, in addition to the substance abuse. And so, these are the people that we need to be very mindful of. It can be short-lived emotional responses to challenges that they're going through in life, but it can also have a very long-lasting impact. And it can gradually, at its worst, lead to, unfortunately, suicide. And suicide is the leading cause of death right now for children that are 15 to 29 years of age. These are the people that are supposed to be the ones who are up and coming, the ones who are going to live their best life and change this world. They're not going to be here to do that. Depressed teenagers have a tendency to be really sulky. They get into trouble in school. They also frequently have eating disorders, substance abuse disorders, lots of different things like that. And they said right now that in high schools, grades 9 to 12, that they're seeing a great number of students that are struggling with anxiety and depression. It's a huge number, and it's a shocking number, and it's a sad number. But when we look at this, they looked at one particular group, and they saw that it was female respondents to this survey with a Hispanic background, and they stated that they had felt sad or hopeless most every day for 2 weeks or more in a row, 12 months prior to the survey. And that number was 46.8% who reported feeling that way. And when a teenager is having problems, the very sound of your breathing can set them off. That fire-breathing dragon comes out in them. And males are going to handle it different than females. The girls, obviously, they turned more within themselves. They were moody and they cried and everything. And my boys, oh, they were wild animals if they got depressed. But this is what you see oftentimes, that they're far more reckless. The worldwide statistics, I'm sorry, I tripped over my words again, but the worldwide statistics say that depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. Worldwide, almost 75% of the people with mental health disorders remain untreated in developing countries, and almost 1 million take their lives every year. In addition to that, the World Health Organization says that 1 in 13 globally suffer from anxiety. So they say that, again, that anxiety disorders are the most common mental health disorders worldwide. And maybe some of them come with specific phobias, maybe major depressive disorder or social phobia, where they don't want to be out with people. There's a lot of things that are going on in their world. And the other statistics that were kind of disturbing to me is the National Alliance on Mental Health, or NAMI, they call it, states that depression impacts about 14 million adults in the country. And so we're seeing that climb exponentially when we're looking at some of our people. Now, when we talk about the common co-occurring disorders, and think about this, you've got some anxiety, and maybe you have alcoholism or PTSD. You have maybe some substance abuse, heart disease, stroke, cancer, HIV, diabetes, Parkinson's, you name it. All of these things can have co-occurring disorders along with it. So we're, like I said, not a happy nation, and we're not a healthy nation. Our young people are getting sick, and that's not a good thing. In a movie that I loved, and I watched it many times, was Anne of Green Gables. In Anne of Green Gables, it was a redheaded orphan named Anne Shirley who was mad at God. She said, I don't want anything to do with God. I haven't thought of him because he made my hair red. He turned his back on me. And Marilla Cuthbert, her caregiver, said that to despair is to turn one's back on God. because this red hair is her lifelong despair. And sometimes we feel that maybe God, whatever your perception of God is, has maybe turned his back on you, and that this is why you're suffering sometimes. And this is when we are going into despair. And it might simply be that, it's just a temporary thing. But when we have prolonged disappointments or even compounded disappointments, that burden can lead us to that point where we feel like we have no hope. And I'm sure that we have felt like that from time to time. But when you think about despair, the visual that you have here on the slide is that here's this person up on top of that rock. But to me, that really doesn't sum up despair. You might be up, you might be surrounded, but you are on top and you got there somehow. You had the drive to make that place, to make that climb. But to despair is to go into a much darker place. And anxiety and depression can take us there. We have to be very, very mindful that one of the things that does take us into despair is loneliness. And as a nurse, I can tell you that I watched a lot of people that were unfortunately left alone and couldn't have any visitors, family couldn't come. And so it was a lot of individuals who just felt like they were alone and they were dying. And dying lonely is still dying. It's just dying bad, really dying bad. So we want to make sure that we try to close that gap to get these people out of that area of despair and let them see that there is some hope. But sometimes it's going to come through you, and it's going to be really strange when it does. Now, I want to talk about medications for just a moment. When we treat anxiety disorders, we use a lot of different medications. We use antidepressants, especially SSRIs and some NSRIs. And when these have been shown to be effective, we also use tricyclic antidepressants. That's not on the list, but tricyclics would be your tofranil, and that really does seem to help. But other anxieties, anxiety drugs, are going to be like the benzodiazepines, the Xanax, and these seem to be very innocuous. They're not going to be a problem at all. But there are risks of addiction or tolerance, meaning that you're going to have higher and higher doses that are going to be necessary in order to achieve that same effect. So they're really not as desirable for long-term use. And we don't see those adjusted like they should be sometimes. And also we use anticonvulsants and antipsychotic drugs that we use them off-label to treat anxiety symptoms, but we're going to do that for a short period of time. It's not going to be a lengthy process, maybe just a few weeks. We do have side effects of these medications, however. Traditional medicine has been around only since about the mid-1800s, whereas Chinese medicine and Indian medicine is thousands of years old and relies more on the naturopathic forms that people are beginning to seek today. And they rely on those a lot more. It's very interesting to me that we're seeing all these things, but look at the side effects. Just look at the side effects. We have blurry vision, fatigue, dry mouth. In fact, almost every medication we give to people gives you dry mouth, but headaches, nausea, sexual problems, erectile dysfunction, sleeping problems, weight gain. Now, if you're looking at these, I'm sure you're thinking, you don't want that one, I don't want that one, I don't want that one when it comes to those side effects. But, these have been around for a while and we haven't improved it. So, I jokingly said maybe they left the lab too soon, but that's only kind of tongue in cheek. We do have alternatives to some of the medications. And I think that it's wonderful that people are starting to look at that. We have 14 different types of therapy relating to behavior modification responses. Have you seen people where they snap that rubber band on their wrist And a lot of times that's for anger management. You know, that I'm getting really, really ticked off about something, and boop, you know, I snap my wrist and it hurts and it takes me away, and I can gain control. And then there's that 4-7-8 breathing. 4-7-8 breathing is stupendous, and we should do this every single day, at least 3 times a day. And that is, you're taking in breath for 4 seconds. You're holding it for 7 seconds, and then forcefully breathing it out for 8 seconds. That breathing, what that does is actually helps to bring oxygen up to that frontal lobe where we have thinking, reasoning, and judgment. All of this is up there in that frontal lobe. And so we oxygenate that blood, because when we're stressed, we tend to not breathe properly. We breathe very shallow, very quick breaths. And so the breath isn't getting down to the base of our lungs and being exchanged in the alveoli, so that the gases are exchanged and that oxygen goes into the blood, and the blood transfers that oxygen all throughout our body. It is not happening. And so we want to make sure that we're doing good breathing. Now, homeopathic and herbal remedies, that's another thing. And then the other thing that we have here is meditation. And I'm not talking about the, the mindlessness. I'm talking about mindfulness, where you are meditating, maybe praying to God, or to just simply listening to the crashing waves and let it put you in that, basically a spiritual place. And so meditation is very, very good. And then, of course, positive affirmations, writing down how you want to perceive yourself that day. And then put it on the refrigerator, put it on the mirror in the bathroom, make little notes that go all over the place. But do those positive affirmations, and truthfully, they make a difference. They make a huge difference. Now, one of the things I do want to talk about, though, was homeopathy. That was also developed in the 18th century, and it's based on the idea that cures like cures, or like cures like. And so, in other words, there might be something that's causing an illness, but it might also cure that same illness. So homeopathy is difficult to study within medicine. A lot of people in medicine says, though, well, when it works, they're just saying it's the placebo effect. I'm not so sure. And I say that because I recently received my certification as a naturopath. And I do believe in the mind-body connection, adding in that spiritual component for healing without the use of pharmaceuticals. Now, there is a place for pharmaceuticals, yes, indeed, but the biggest drug that you have is right up here in your noggin. Use it, and use choices appropriately. So there are a lot of good medications. As I said, I'm not anti-medication. But let me tell you, when we're talking about medications that we're using for anxiety or depression, we have to think about this. They do work slowly. It takes time to get it into your system. And if it isn't the right drug, we have to wean you off. So it takes time to get out of your system as well. So these are things that people don't think about. If you're taking this pill, you want it to work instantaneously. The only thing instantaneously is how you decide. And there are some people that can really channel that thought process very, very well. Again, I encourage you, look up mindfulness and see how you can actually help work your own health to your own benefit. And it's easy to do. It's just that we have gotten this idea in our head, oh, mindfulness, well, that's all new agey. No, it's been around for thousands of years. We just didn't talk about it because it was quicker to take a drug. And so that's what we want to try to get away from. Be responsible, take action, make proper choices. These are really in your best interest. So there are diseases of despair. And when I think about that, I think about what's happening in their life. And taking drugs to alleviate depression and related maladies has really become very, very normal. But it wouldn't have been possible without the decades-long shift in our understanding of depression. Now, we used to think that it was something that couldn't be helped. Well, it can be helped. And we understand now that it's sort of a defense mechanism. It helps to take care of us, but it's an underlying condition of anxiety that sets off by maybe challenging situations that we're going through. And this is where we have some of those issues. But it's not a fleeting reaction like we used to think. It is a solid condition. And if we have stressors in our lives that we haven't been able to work around, and then we put other things into our lives that are unhealthy, it's going to lead us into a very, very bad place, physically, emotionally, sociologically, everywhere. And then, of course, suicide. There are some people who don't reach for the life ring, and it's not an inevitable outcome. We need to increase the attention to address mental health that can truly make a difference. When we think about suicide, it can be like any cause of death, but this is where that loss is felt so many. You throw a rock into that water and there's a little ripple and it goes bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's you. You've gone in the water, and now your friends and your family, and then your coworkers, and then your communities. And then, especially if it's a young person, we see people that are just very, very far away from who knew you or didn't know you at all, but knew the situation, that it was a young person who'd taken their life. And it just really exposes loss on all kinds of different levels. It's not the answer. Your problems might be over for a minute, but it causes problems for a lot of people for a long period of time. What can we do? Well, like I said, suicide isn't inevitable, but these are numbers that everybody needs to take out and learn. Now, it used to be a long string of numbers. You see that lifeline number, that's what you would call if you had a suicide prevention hotline need. Now they've simplified that, and it's now 988. That's all the number that you have to call. And there's also a text line. There's lots of different things, and you don't have to be suicidal to call it. You can be trying to help somebody that your fear might be suicidal, and they will tell you how to help your friend. Now, the important thing is like in this graphic, don't let go. They need you. They definitely need you. How do I know that? Because sometimes it only takes one. I told you about my upbringing in the beginning. But what I didn't tell you is that when I was 15, I decided that life was too much. And I had everything set out to end my life. And it was one person who said that she didn't feel I was acting like my normal self. I was happy, but it was not like my normal self. And so she demanded that I come over and spend the night at her house. And we built a fire in the fireplace, and we talked all night long. And it was the first time in my life, young life, I was only 15, the first time in my life that I felt like I had meaning and purpose. And that is what changed my life. Sometimes it only takes that one. Don't be afraid to hang on, because you might make all the difference in the world. Our youth, like I said, that these are the ones who are going to be leading the pack tomorrow. And while suicide is very complex, there's not usually a single reason for why it happens, but there's something that we all need to understand, and that is, I put on the slide here, be ready to be shocked, disappointed, maybe even a little bit angry. I mentioned that our kids feel stress. Of course they feel stress. But if you think they don't, guess again. They certainly do. But what if your insurance was too good and you couldn't get any help for them? That's actually the case, where we had an article, it was in the paper, and there was the heading of the article said that serious holes in the insurance safety net. And as it turned out, there was a lady, her name's Jane Shank. She was the executive director of the Lansing-based Association for Children's Mental Health. And what they do is they help to direct and connect children with services. And she said, if you don't have Medicaid, 9 out of 10 times you're going to end up in the ER rather than get treatment. And in the ER, they're going to get drugs, or they're going to face just 3 days. But there's no real comprehensive wraparound service for these kids if there's insurance, because many of the insurances don't cover mental health care. And it's appalling to me, just appalling, that 3 families were told that they, in order to get care for their child that needed the care, that they would get more immediate psychiatric care and support if they relinquished parental rights to the state. We're having people that are freaking out over what's being taught in the schools, and here's a child who has problems, and we're going to relinquish them to the state. I don't know. So, look into the insurance, because our young people, we need to step up to the plate to help them. We really, truly do. And there is a big link between depression and social media. We're seeing it with the older generation. We're seeing it with the younger ones as well. We see people who spend most of their time communicating on Instagram, Facebook, and other platforms. And we have gone from 13 to 66% higher rate of reported depression than those people who spent little time on social media. And the thing with social media is you can sometimes get hooked into an echo chamber. And so if you have a negative thought or something and people are responding to that, it can be a negative thought all over again. It's just not healthy. So if you're going to be on social media, which I'm not, I get on social media myself, but I don't spend hours on it, because to me that is a colossal waste of time. Our elders actually seem to be having a little bit more problem as well, because while they may not be savvy to social media, there are other things that are going on, and social isolation and loneliness, while they don't always accompany one another, they do link together for higher risk of a variety of physical and mental conditions. And this is what we're seeing. This is what we're seeing across the nation. We see a lot more people who have a lot more prone to high blood pressure, heart disease, weakened immune function, anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, and even death. And it is a well-known fact that the more somebody is in isolation and doesn't have that ability to go to activities or to interact with individuals face to face, the cognitive decline got much worse very quickly. So we need to pay attention to the older people, because loneliness acts like a fertilizer, and none of us want to bathe in that. But there's a whole lot more that we have to think about too. That the most prevalent thing is loneliness, and they're struggling. They are struggling. How can we get more people in there? Maybe even if we can't visit more frequently, call on the phone, talk to them. My daughters, they don't call on the phone very often. They text me, and I don't like that because I want to talk to them. So we got to watch out for our seniors as well, because they're greatly impacted by loneliness. So now let's get into the happy thing. Oh my goodness. Didn't think we'd ever get there, did you? Well, let's talk about the benefits of laughter. The benefits of laughter are just really superb. Research has shown that the limbic system, which is in the center of the brain, and it contains the amygdala and the hippocampus, and that processes most of our basic emotions, hunger, fear, but it's also triggered when we see or hear something funny. And so eventually it stimulates the motor region of the brain to become a lot more active, and that's what produces the physical reaction of laughing and that vocal expulsion, that contagious laughter. If you've ever experienced contagious laughter, somebody is going crazy and you can't figure out why, but you're laughing too. Well, there you go. University of Maryland in the United States has linked together laughter and healthy function of blood vessels. And so it helps to lower your chance of a heart attack. And laughter also boosts the heart rate and the production of certain antibodies, which helps to strengthen your immune system. So this was a part of a study that was done. They did an EEG on the brain, the electroencephalograph, and they showed the brain's activity was being measured when somebody was laughing. And in each case, the brain produced a regular electrical pattern with 0.4 of a second of exposure to something that was potentially funny. An electrical wave went through the cerebral cortex to the largest part of the brain, and then that's when people laughed. And there are 42 muscles in the face, and laughter can give them a really good workout. And we want to do that. We see people sometimes, they say, oh, don't make me laugh, my face hurts, my stomach hurts, it's there getting all that air exchange. And anyway, but there's a chemical that we produce in our own heads. It's a happy hormone, and it's one that I mentioned earlier, and it's the dopamine. So this is maybe where you're going to see funny videos or of a funny cartoon or something. You hear a joke and it just makes you laugh. And so laughter is a full body experience. Believe it or not, there are patients, and I have treated them myself, using laughter, using fun things that take their mind off their pain. And it actually has, one lady in particular really just amazed me. She went from rating her pain at an 8 down to rating her pain at a 3. And I never gave her a single drug. What I did give her, I gave her catnip. And we watched her cat just go wild. And I gave her a laser pen, and she played with that for a while with the cat, and it was just hilarious. So, when you think about laughter, it is very important that we do that. And it does make you feel good. And sometimes you can trick your brain. Your brain's not that smart. Your brain can actually be tricked. You can look in the mirror, you can be in a really, really cruddy mood, and you can look in that mirror and you can start smiling. And pretty soon, your image is going to be smiling back at you, and it releases that dopamine in your head. It happens all the time. So, like I said, your brain's not that smart. Now, you guys might all be smart, but your brain's not that smart. Sorry. So humor is this umbrella that we talk about dementia and all the different things underneath this umbrella of dementia. But humor is that umbrella term, and that is where we maybe play jokes on people, we hear jokes, stories, funny stories, games, all of this could fall underneath that. And play is one of those ways to experience humor, but definitely not the only way. And laughter is another possible outcome of it. So there's nothing better than laughing until tears running down your face, but it is great. But just as a little side thing here is the humor has to be appropriate. Now, there was actually a lady who was waiting for her mother to call, and her mother texted her instead, and she said, I have cancer. And this lady said, I was trying to fight back the tears when my mom claimed that it wasn't all bad, because she said, hey, I get a free boob job. And it's like, oh my goodness. My family is a little bit twisted, and they would have found that to be a little bit funny. But we use humor to reject, reframe, relieve, and refresh. So how do we do that? It's going to take care of some of this stress. So what do? Well, we reject things. We have a to-do list, right? How about a to-don't list? We can reject those stressors that might not be as humorous, but is a vital step in stress management. So do a don't list. Don't react. Don't do this or don't do that. Make sure that you are taking charge. We want to reframe things. As adults, and believe me, adulting is hard. There are certain things that we have to do, and that's when you can try to reframe them. You know, like that joke about the free boob job. She's going in for breast cancer surgery, and she's trying to put a funny spin on it. And that helped her. It relieved the situation. But something that has to be done when we have a positive spin on it, it helps us. You're losing your hair. My husband's losing his hair. He's freaking out over that. I said, going bald? Well, what are we going to do with that extra money that you don't have to use for hair care products or haircuts? You know, there's always something. And then relieve it. Some things are legit bad. Let them be bad. But this is when you do something to ease your mind. And this might mean taking a walk. It might be those breathing exercises that I talked about, or meditation, or maybe you're watching a funny video on TV. And lastly, refresh. We used to be able to take vacations and let our stresses melt away, but an underlying sense of stress is following us wherever we go now. And so we have to find other things to do. So what are we going to do? Under refresh, one of the things that I do is I like to keep a humor journal. And I actually have it right here on my desk. And ta-da, there it is. And I took a picture of the inside of my journal. I just opened it up and took a picture of it so you could see some of the things that I write down. And I kept these maybe from Facebook memes, or I hear something and I write it down. It just makes me happy. And I take that on trips. I take it on business trips because, you know, honestly, you're sitting alone in the hotel room. It can get a little bit boring. And so I think about some of the funny things that I wrote in here, just I find humorous, that questions of life. What if the only reason the dog licks you is because there are bones under your skin? Just a thought. I'm pretty sure my last words are likely to be rats. That didn't work. Or maybe stop being a jerk. Now there, I'm your life coach. You know, so just little things that you can write down that are going to make you happy. Okay. Now, another growth opportunity. You will sometimes fail. We all do. But here's what we have to do. We have to face it, embrace it, defy it, and conquer it. If I can do it, and other people that I've seen in life can do it. I saw a man who was burned unrecognizable, always had to wear a mask when he was out in public because he was so horrifically burned. And you know, he turned that around and he made that his signature. And he's one of the most popular speakers that existed for a long time. He has since died, unfortunately, but he didn't let his disability conquer him. It was a growth opportunity. So if you don't get to choose to be happy or peaceful right now, you're going to run out of time. And this is something we have to be mindful of. There's only a certain amount of time that we have. And it might be hard day to day, but it can be better tomorrow if we just work on it today. And if you focus where you failed, you'll continue to suffer. But if you focus on success, this is where you're going to continue to grow. And this is where you will flourish. Now, life is messy. Gardening is messy. We still do it. We do it with joy. But it's a great way to have the reduction of stress and improve your quality of life. Don't always make it easy. Make it worth it. And so just move along. And remember this. Your body hears everything that your mind says and believes. So get out of your mind prison. So what can we do? Well, caring what other people think. Okay, this can be an excuse for bad behavior. Living in the past, right? Learn to forgive. I have, and it helped me. It liberated me. It's freedom, even though they didn't ask for it. Okay, and fearing change. You know, change is choice. Don't be stagnant. Feed your brain positive thoughts and your anxiety will starve to death. I promise you. You also want to break that cycle of cynical. You want to get help. You want to commit to it, pursue it, and believe it. You have to believe life can be better. At my worst, I didn't want to live anymore. And then I found things were different, but it took action. It took action. Doing for other people. If you've ever seen the movie Facing the Giants, remember that during that time, there was somebody who was doing the death crawl, and he had somebody on his back, and he had to crawl a certain amount of feet, and everybody was cheering. Now he's blindfolded. He doesn't know that he has crossed that line, thinking that he couldn't because of this weight that's on him. And he was struggling and struggling, and he had actually gone twice the distance. How did he do that? Not because he was so strong, but because he had encouragement and staying connected to joy. We have to multiply thoughts like rabbits have babies. It doesn't always happen. We have to take control of that. This little critter that's on there, that's a quokka. And that animal, actually, that's his face. That is the face of an animal that you're going to see him always look like that, is a perpetual smile on his little face. And by the way, they're in Australia about the size of a small cat, and they have no fear of humans at this point in time. They should. I fear humans sometimes, but don't let the environment control you. It really is important. And it's important to be silly sometimes. It's okay. So when we talk about creating a health and humor routine, you remember you always have a choice, and you have to indulge yourself with positive self-talk. It could be just as simple as reading your journal for the day or writing something in your journal for inspiration, but you have control. How we think about the future is going to determine our future. So sometimes we dismiss or even ignore certain parts of us that are important to us. But remember, one of those things I said earlier is spiritual. Now, there's a difference between spiritual and religious. Religious is a set of organization, beliefs, and practices usually shared by a community and that kind of thing. But spirituality is more of an individual practice. It has to do with having a sense of peace and purpose, and it relates to developing beliefs around the meaning of life and connection to other people without any real set of spiritual values or rules, if you will. And the last but not least, I think it's very important that we hang on to hope. That is huge. We have 86,400 seconds in every day, one 24-hour period, 86,400. Now, if I said to you, I would give you, and I'm not going to, by the way, I'm not going to really do this, but it's a hypothetical. If I said I was going to give you $30 or maybe $3,000 after 90 days, and all you had to do was for 30 minutes each day, just sit and relax, how often would you find the time to do that? Would $3,000 motivate you to that change? Why did I choose 90 days? Because it takes about that time to really develop a habit. And if you develop the habit of being restful, being calm for that 30 minutes a day, you're going to see it's going to lay deep roots within your life, and it's going to help you. You have to be intentional about it. We're not intentional about your breathing. That's a natural thing. You have to be intentional to fight that stress and that anxiety that comes on us because of the world that we're in. It's crazy out there. And you have to be consciously aware of your feelings. Your body is talking to you. It's knocking on your door. Are you listening? If it's telling you that something is negative going on, you need to hear it. You need to understand what it's saying to you and make those changes so that you can be healthy. So when you're consciously aware of your feelings, you can change them, and you can change your world. And eventually you can change the world of other people as well. I want to thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you physically today. Technical difficulties do arise, but I do appreciate all of you. And I will left my number there. You can call me if you want to have a discussion. Remember, I'm not a therapist, but I am a friend, and I will listen. So thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate you. Go forth, be a blessing to others.
That concludes the webinar for today. And as we said at the beginning, if you have any questions, please send them to our email address at webinar@ncro.org, and we will get with Andy and get answers to those questions. And again, as we said in the first place, we apologize, but luckily we planned ahead. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's presentation. And with that, I am going to end the webinar. Everyone have a safe and healthy day, and we'll see you at the next session.